Welcome to Making the Most of Public Service Internships, a webinar sponsored by the Interagency Working Group on Youth Programs. I'm your host, Paul Jaguar. We will begin with a word from Michelle Boyd, Society for Research Child Development Policy Fellow at the Department of Health and Human Services. Michelle?
Thanks, Paul. Internships provide young people opportunities to apply their academic knowledge to the workplace, build their skills, and network. In today's job market, internships can make a real difference by providing access to opportunities to apply classroom learning in a real-world context. The purpose of this webinar is to raise awareness of internship opportunities within and through the federal government and offer prospective interns suggestions for how to make the most of internships in public service. We hope you all enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Michelle. Before we get into the segment, I'd like to walk everyone through a few technical and logistical items. Please note that all participant lines are muted and will remain muted throughout the course of the discussion, so you'll not be able to be heard. Your questions are welcome, though, and we will pause at multiple points throughout today's conversation to share your questions or comments with our guests. If you have a question during Q&A or at any time during the conversation, please type it in the Q&A box located at the bottom right of your screen. We'll try to get as many questions as possible, given our time allotted. Any question that we do not get to will be collected and answered in an upcoming brief published on findyouthinfo.gov and the new internship section of Youth Engage for Change. You can visit Youth Engage for Change at engage.findyouthinfo.gov. This website was developed to, 1, encourage youth and young adults to shape programs, policies, and services that affect them. 2, promote meaningful partnerships between youth and adults. 3, share federal resources with youth and young adults. And 4, connect youth and young adults to opportunities funded by the federal government. Today we're going to explore the world of public service internships with 3 guests who have plenty of experience on the topic. As we will learn today, there are many different types. She's on camera and is joining us from California. Darrell Bonner and Rachel Dornum are on the phone line with us from Washington, D.C. Darrell was a former intern with the U.S. Department of Education. As you'll hear today, he is currently using his prior experience as an intern to continue strengthening the internship program at the U.S. Department of Education. Rachel began as an intern with the U.S. Department of Labor and now works for the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, overseeing the federal government's Pathways program, which you'll learn more about today. We hope you'll walk away from today's webinar with valuable information about how to get into a federal internship and how to make the most of the experience while you're there. For audience members in the position to help other young people, you'll hear about ways you can help them through this important step in the career journeys. Welcome, Bonnie, Darrell, and Rachel. I'm very glad you can join us. Darrell, we'll start with you. Can you tell us about your time with the Department of Education, and we'll explain how your internship experience with Ed led you to your current role?
Sure. So the last semester of my senior year, I was looking for an internship. I was a journalism major, and for the most part, most of my internship experiences have been at some of the local television stations, and so I was really looking for something different. I had like a tremendous amount of like interest in education policy, and as I said, I was a journalist. So I was randomly in the career office at my university and had learned about the Department of Education and didn't know really much about the department. So did a little research and I interned within the Office of Communication and Outreach because, of course, the department had a press shop, and it was just this connection that I didn't know. And so interned within the Office of Communications where I was able to kind of utilize my major and just kind of work on things that was of interest to me. And so in my case, that translated into a position at the department. And so I didn't know that within the Department of Education and the Office of Communication and Outreach that there was a team of within that team, I was ultimately able to come on board and work at the department. And through this position, I coordinate the department's internship program.
That's great. I'm wondering if you could give us a couple of examples of different types of internships available to youth within the Department of Education.
Sure. So, I mean, within the department, as you can imagine, it's a very, and it's not the largest federal agency, but it's a pretty big one. And so that means there are obviously like a lot of departments within the Department of Education. So we have over 15 offices, obviously that all do many different things. And so in that, we enable students to intern within those offices. And so generally anything that is of interest to students, like we totally have an office at Ed that kind of works on that.
What are some of the most popular offices at Ed?
Yeah, so generally when people think of, of federal agencies, they generally think of policy. So our Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development is certainly one of our popular offices. And so, so those are two popular offices.
What kinds of tasks do interns do or may do for them, do you think?
So it's wide range. I mean, I think a little bit of that can be research. I mean, it really depends on the office. Some offices within the department look for students with statistical background. As I mentioned, there's the Office of Communication Outreach that looks for good writers. So I mean, the skill sets that the office requires obviously depends on the work, but generally, any student will probably find a position at the department.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So, Rachel, I understand that the Pathways Initiative is a federal initiative that provides programs and opportunities across the federal government. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about the Pathways program and in particular what you do.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Paul. That's a great question. Again, my name is Rachel Dorman, and I work for the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, and our mission is to recruit, retain, and honor federal employees. So we're basically the human resources arm for all of the federal government, which means we focus on recruiting, bringing people in, but also making sure that you're developed and have lots of training opportunities, as well as we do background checks for 90% of federal employees and contractors. We manage the largest healthcare system in the country, so the federal healthcare system. But I have, I think, one of the best jobs. I get to work in our Office of Student Programs, and we focus on working with both agencies across government as well as students and recent grads to get them excited about public service and all aspects of public service. I've been here for about 4 years, and over that time we have created a new program called the Pathways Programs, which really streamlined the way students and recent graduates can enter the federal workforce. And the purpose of these programs is not only entering the federal workforce, but also developing and retaining you so that you'll consider is maybe not one path is good for the same person, so you have many ways to enter federal service. The first is the internship program, and the idea with this program is if you're currently enrolled in school and you want to work for the government, and these are paid positions through the Pathways internship program. In order to be eligible, you must be a current student from high school all the way to graduate school, enrolled or accepted for enrollment and seeking a degree, and enrolled at least part-time or full-time. These positions can be part-time or full-time depending on what the agency needs, and they are in every job you can imagine. You mentioned one great thing I always tell students is if you're thinking about what jobs you might want to consider, maybe to watch the State of the Union address, see what the president's going to be talking about. You get a sense of what the agencies might be hiring. So, for example, you might have remembered there was a big healthcare law that passed a few years ago. That agency may be picking up lots of employees in the healthcare field. So that's the internship program. The second program is the recent graduates program, and the idea here is if you have already completed your degree, you're eligible for the recent graduates program. To be eligible to apply, you can apply starting about 6 months or so before you complete your degree, and you can continue to apply for positions up to 2 years after you complete your degree. And that's anywhere from vocational technical certificates, associate degrees, undergraduate, graduate, and professional degrees. Veterans do have some additional time to apply. If their active duty service precludes them, they have up to 6 years to apply. And mentoring, and you can be converted to a permanent position after you graduate. And then the final program is our Presidential Management Fellows program. That program is actually run out of our office. That's for advanced degree candidates. It was created about 30 years ago, and we've revamped it under the Pathways program. We do a recruiting for that once a year every fall, and so for individuals who are getting advanced degrees, so that's master's degrees, law degrees, PhDs, even medical degrees, you can apply for that program during our final year of graduate school or up to 2 years after. And if you have more questions or are really interested in the PMF program, you can go to pmf.gov, and we have a listserv that you can sign up for to get information on the latest in terms of how to become eligible. And I think on the screen now you can actually see a USA Jobs, which is the place where you would apply for internship and recent grad programs. And we'll probably be talking a little bit more of this later on, but I just want to give you a highlight of what the 3 programs are. Thanks, Paul.
That's great, Rachel. Rachel, I wanted to just follow up with one question. About how many people actually apply for the 3 programs that you just mentioned, roughly every year?
The programs aren't centralized in that you submit one overall application. So students and recent grads can actually apply for every single position, and it is managed by the agencies. So the agencies track it. A lot of flexibility in terms of when they post positions. They're year-round, so it's not just a traditional, when you think of agencies recruiting in the fall for their summer jobs, it's really looking at year-round in terms of what do they need for their workforce planning. And so as far as the numbers, because the program is so new, we have just collected some reporting data from our agencies, and we'll be announcing that in the next couple months.
That's great. Thank you very much. Let's move to Bonnie. Bonnie, can you tell us more about your internship and how you became interested in interning at the Department of Labor?
Yeah. Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me here today. My story is a little bit different. I wasn't necessarily looking for an internship with the Department of Labor. I was a senior at UC Berkeley, finishing up, and I was part of a professional development program. And I had a lot of concerns about working after I finished my college studies because I have a chronic health condition. And at the time, I really didn't think that I would be able to hold down a full-time job. I was very nervous and didn't really know where to look and what to look for. And one of my instructors in my professional development class told me about a program that's put on by the American Association for People with Disabilities. And it's a summer internship program where they connect students. So you can be undergrad, grad, professional degree. So they connect students who have disabilities and health conditions with internships in Washington, D.C. And my instructor really encouraged me to apply. One of my classmates had also been in the program and also encouraged me to apply. And so I applied, and I was accepted. And once I was accepted, both of them said, you should really think about interning with the U.S. Department of Labor at the Office of Disability Employment Policy. My instructor had worked there for many, many years, and my classmate had interned there himself, and they both thought that it would be a great experience for me. At the time, I first disability employment policy, but I heard wonderful things about the team there, about the type of experience I would have, and with a lot of positive peer pressure, my instructor and my friend encouraged me to apply. And so I ended up there in a little bit of a different manner than some interns do, but I'm glad I did because it turned out to be a pretty incredible experience.
That's great. Thanks a lot. I just want to also remind everyone that at any time, you can submit questions in the Q&A box located in the bottom right of your screen. Please feel free to do that at any time. We're going to be entering a Q&A period pretty soon. So please feel free to send us some questions, and we will get them to the right person who is a guest today. Let me get back to Bonnie and ask you a follow-on question. What kind of advice would you give to youth who probably don't have someone to push them as much as your peers and your professors did?
That's a really great question because I was very lucky in that respect. I would say the first thing for people who feel overwhelmed by the application process, as Rachel mentioned, there's a lot of different programs, and some of the agencies it's not a wholly centralized process. And so really buddying up with friends and classmates who also have a similar interest in finding an internship and really creating a plan. You really need friends and family supporting you through the process, and it's really helpful to have someone who you can sit down with and say, well, I'm going to make this plan for looking for opportunities and applying to these opportunities and making a schedule and brainstorming ideas, because I definitely couldn't have done it without support, and so it's really important to find some sort of support, whether it's a parent, whether it's an instructor, a community member, maybe your coach, some person. It's good to have somebody your age, and it's also good to have somebody a little bit older and more experienced, somebody who you trust, somebody who is your biggest fan, somebody who has your back 100% and can really help you after school or after work. That would be a big piece of advice.
Clearly, in your case, being highly motivated helps as well to pull the people together that you need to have on your team to help you do this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to want it.
That's right.
Pieces of the application process, you may have to submit documents. You may need to do a series of interviews either in person or on the phone. And so it's really important to stay motivated, to stay on top of things, and to stay organized. And having a friend or a mentor to help you hold yourself accountable can be really helpful.
That's great. Well, what I'd like to do is just pause for a moment to collect any questions that people might have for our guests, and then we will triage them and I'll read them online for everyone, and hopefully have some additional conversation around some of the topics we've already covered. So with that, I'm going to pause for 1 minute, and we'll resume in about a minute or so. Okay, so we have a question. This one is from Brittany, and let's see. Trying to read it. There we go. Is AmeriCorps or Peace Corps good ways to get federal jobs? So I'm going to open that question up to all three of our guests today, and perhaps you can help reply to this question. Rachel, Darrell, Bonnie?
This is Bonnie. I can jump in on that.
That's great.
Yeah, there's no one experience that's going to guarantee you a job anywhere. If you're looking for a federal job, your qualifications depend on the education you received at school, your internship experience, your prior work experience. However, I will say, and Rachel can correct me on this, I believe there is sort of a separate hiring program for returning Peace Corps volunteers. And during my time in Washington, D.C., I definitely encountered many, many Peace Corps volunteers in federal jobs. However, they also had to have specific qualifications as well. It wasn't just being a Peace Corps volunteer.
Great, thank you. And that question was from Brittany Obey. Another question from Hadid Simmons. How best can young college students position themselves for high-impact internships that can serve as a launching pad for learning transferable skills that will allow them to leverage high-impact job opportunities?
Hi, Paul. This is Rachel. Can I take this question?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Okay. Well, there are many things that you can do to set yourself up for success when it comes to federal positions, but I'm just going to give you one example for today. And the first thing I would say is starting with a really solid federal resume. Federal resumes are a bit different than private sector resumes. It's probably everything that you didn't learn at your career center when it comes to private sector resumes, and you can find a lot of information on USA Jobs as well as gogovernment.org on how resume. It's really important that you use the space to show all of the things you've accomplished. And that's not necessarily just employment accomplishments. A lot of people maybe can't work or do an internship during the summer because they have to use their work study for their financial aid, or they have to for whatever reason. And so it's important that you highlight maybe if you've done a group project in your class and you've led that team. So that's really good skills that federal employees or federal managers are looking for, not necessarily gained through employment experience. So volunteer experience, community service experience can really be counted towards that time. So a solid federal resume, have a couple of people who you know who've maybe worked for the government, or go to your career center on campus, or go to your one-stop shop for in your local community in terms of having someone look at your resume. You can never have enough people review your resume. Someone may find something or suggest a tip. And so I think that is the first thing, that's your first impression when you're applying for these positions, and the thing that hiring managers look at first. And just can I add something about the AmeriCorps and Peace Corps volunteer question?
Sure.
So although I'm not an alum of the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, I certainly have a lot of friends who were really successful in those programs, and they are a great opportunity for public service. And so if that is an interest of yours, doing international development work or community service, it's definitely something I would encourage you to consider. When you return or complete those programs, you do have what we call a non-competitive appointment eligibility for federal jobs for a limited you have to be qualified for the position. So if the position requires 5 years of experience and you only have 2, then that means you're not qualified for the position. Or if it requires, a lot of jobs in the federal government require you to have a degree in a certain subject. So accountants, for an accounting position in the government, you have to do 24 hours of accounting credits. So if you haven't done those, then unfortunately you wouldn't be eligible for that position, even if you do have that non-competitive eligibility.
That's great. Thanks for picking up on that first question. And thank you, Brittany, for your questions. It's important, moving on, it's important to do research on different types of internship opportunities available in order to find out how to apply and raise your chances of getting selected for a good fit for you. For more information and tips about federal internships overall, visit engage.findyouthinfo.gov. Darrell and Rachel, I imagine many of our guests are interested in knowing where to apply, but even more important, what would you say to those who might say, I know how to apply, I just don't know how to get myself selected, or what do I need to do to stand out from the pack? Darrell, I'll start with Darrell. What does Ed look for when selecting youth for an internship, and what are some of the examples youth can do to make their application stand out?
Thanks for the question, Paul. So, I mean, our eligibility requirements are like really simple. We just require for students to be 16 years of age and enrolled in an institution or have specific plans to enroll the following semester. So I guess hence the name is the Student Volunteer Internship Program. So that's the basic requirements for us. In terms of the application process, so we require a resume, and I think it's important to note that Rachel mentioned the federal service resume. We don't require that. So a general private sector resume, which many students are probably familiar with, that's the basic thing that we require. And of course, in those resumes, dependent generally for college students, 1 page is sufficient. And so we require a resume, we require a cover letter, and just the application form, which is a 2-page document. It literally would take 3 minutes to complete. So those are the very basic requirements to intern at the department.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the cover letter, and I would imagine
when I interned in college, the vast majority of my internships were at local television stations, and so when I applied for the department, the cover letter was particularly important because I was able to talk about, my youth civic engagement work, my youth activism work, and talk about my interest in education policy. And it was really able to kind of paint the picture of who I was as an applicant, and ultimately explain why I was interested in an internship at the department. So for us, we realized that in many cases, students before they, apply may not have necessarily worked in the federal government before, and may not have experience related to the particular office that they're interested in applying for. And so just given that, we really, encourage folks to take, a significant amount of time on the cover letter, because when someone's reviewing your application, that can be the difference in terms of you getting the internship.
that's great. Thank you. And Rachel, I'm wondering if you have anything to add to what Darrell suggested about how to make an application really stand out.
Hi, Paul. I think Darrell's comments were great. The only piece I would add is when applying for specifically pathways positions and looking for those positions on USA Jobs, I think sometimes they can be a little overwhelming for folks. You look at the application and say, oh my God, there's so much information. How do I break it down? And so I would tell folks, try not to be overwhelmed. Look at each section of the position in terms of the overview, the duties, the instructions on how to apply. Don't meet the eligibility because they don't complete all the application requirements. And one example for that is if the position requires you to provide a transcript, typically it's an unofficial transcript, it's fine. You want to make sure you include that document, because if you don't, then unfortunately the agency can't even consider you. And so that is, I think, one of my biggest tips for students, especially young people. If you're applying while you're still in school or right after school, your education is one of your best qualifications for these positions, and so it's important that you want to provide that information so that you can be considered.
Yeah, it's good life lesson. Follow the directions. It'll serve you well.
And Paul, can I just add something real quick? This is Bonnie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just want to add, I thought Darrell and Rachel's points were spot on. One thing that I'd also say is you really have to make your application sparkle and be different than somebody else's. In my current position right now, I'm doing so if you're applying for an internship and you've seen a lot of resumes and cover letters from your friends, and a lot of them use the words ambitious or self-motivator or detail-oriented, take all of those bland words out, throw them out, and find something new and different, because a lot of people's applications end up sounding exactly the same, and then you never stand out and you'll get passed over.
That's really good advice. Thank you, Bonnie. So, Rachel, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to youth that think federal internships are too exclusive or too hard to get into?
Hi, Paul. That's a really good question, and something we hear almost every day from applicants who are applying for positions. And that's central place. Sometimes they did, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes agencies would go to their career centers in their local area to recruit, but you would never hear about the jobs. And so with the Pathways programs, it's now required that every agency posts their internship positions and their PMF positions on USA Jobs. So there's one central place, so you'll have access to everything. Now, more people may be applying for those jobs, so it may be a little bit more competitive, but at least you know what's out there and you have the opportunity to apply for every single position. There's a specific tool on USA Jobs which can be really useful when it comes to applying for these positions. We have something called a saved search. So once you set up an account on USA Jobs, it's pretty easy. If you have a Facebook account, I promise you can set up a USA Jobs account, and you complete a search with all the criteria that you want in terms of the location of the job, whether it's an internship position or even a recent grad position. You can actually save the search in your account, and the system can email you once a day any job that meets that criteria. They can email you daily, weekly, or not at all, but you just want to save the search so when you log into your account, you don't have to read opportunity. But these positions are for everyone. It's not just for people who know people.
That's great. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is open up the questions again, and if anyone has any questions, please type them again into the Q&A. So we don't have any questions coming in at the moment. However, what I'd like to do is just leave the Q&A box open and available. So throughout any of the conversations that are happening while we are engaging with each other and discussing internship opportunities and experiences, please feel free to continue to ask questions. We will take them as they come. What I'd like to do is move into another part of the discussion. So while the environment for getting in what advice would you give to students that want to make the most of the internship experiences?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think having an internship is so different than being in school, right? You put all this effort into a sets you a lecture, they give you a piece of homework or a test. That's not going to happen at an internship. You have a lot more control over what your experience is going to be like. And so you really, my two pieces of advice are you have to make a plan and you have to be proactive. So the first part, when you walk into a classroom, your teacher has already determined what you're going to learn that year, how you're going to learn it, and they already have a reason for why you're going to learn it and what you're going to do with it. But in an internship, you really need to do some thinking before you start as to what do you want to get out of that internship. What are your goals? When I first started my internship, for me it was just to figure out if I could work in an office environment. It was pretty basic, pretty much focused on survival. But your goal could be that you want to become a better writer, or you want to learn how this agency that you're interested in works. Or maybe you want to build a new knowledge base around employment policy. So really establishing what you want to learn, what skills you want to pick up, what knowledge base you want to acquire. Also, another thing that interns often overlook, being at an internship is not just about doing work, it's also about building relationships and expanding your personal and professional networks. So also thinking about who do you want to meet, or if you don't know exactly who, what types of people? Do you want to meet people who are in the accounting side? Do you want to meet people who are in leadership? Really creating a detailed plan and then finding an opportunity or a way to share this plan with your coworkers and with your supervisors. Like I said, your supervisors are most likely happy to have you, and they probably have a few tasks for you. But I think many interns are surprised at how little preparation actually happens when an intern comes. Your supervisor and be proactive about sharing that plan with your new workplace and trying to make it happen. Sort of to piggyback. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it sounds like it works both ways. The internship has to offer an enriching experience, but at the same time, the intern has to take the initiative to make the most of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Your workplace is going to have probably overworked and understaffed, and they don't necessarily have the time to plan everything for you. So like you said, you really have to take it. And also I think it's not just making a plan that is the only way you have to be proactive, but you also have to be proactive in terms of asking for responsibility or looking out for opportunities for you to take on a bigger role in your workplace. Many interns sit at their desks the whole summer. I saw this at the second place where I interned, which was the National Democratic Institute. Some of my fellow interns sat at their desk the entire summer and did a few of the activities or the tasks that were assigned to them and never even realized that they could do something more or ask for something more. And I had a tip-off from a previous intern, and here's another piece of advice. Another great way to make the most out of your internship is to get in contact with people who have interned there before. They'll tell you who will help you, who won't help you, what are great ways to get support. They'll give you the inside scoop. And a previous intern told me, if you ask, they'll let you go to events outside of the office. And so I drew up a list of activities or events and presentations I wanted to go to. And my supervisor said, great, go. And so while my fellow interns sat at their desks the whole summer doing pretty much very little, I was out about town meeting new people, learning new knowledge, really expanding my experience. So you really have to be proactive and really go for it.
That's a really good point. Rachel, as an intern manager, what steps do you take to ensure that the internship experience is of high quality?
Hi, Paul. For example, my office currently just moved from one floor to another, and we have an intern who's in high school, so she helped us pack up a lot of files and office supplies. We host a lot of events here, so a lot of supplies. But we tried to really explain to her what impact that would have in terms of helping our team. And so even when you maybe aren't doing the most fun things, it's really important that you learn where that comes into the bigger picture of the organization. The other thing that I really try to do when we have a new intern or new employee on our team is really find out what their interests are and try and design at least one special project that they can work on, a larger project that they can go back and forth to over the course of their experience, whether it's the summer or semester, something that when there's not maybe a short task to do, but they have some downtime, they can go back and work on it. And so by the end of the semester, the end of the project, they have something that they've completed at the end that they can say that they've done for their resume. So it's not just performing daily tasks, but maybe working on something larger that can help our organization. One example to that is that we were looking at redesigning content for our website, and it involved researching many different websites and pulling links and writing new content. And it was not a project that it was just going to take a day or two. And so one intern had a real interest in that, and so we had them work on that over the course of many months. The third thing I want to say is that I am always looking for interns who are interested in taking initiatives. So I really like the example that Bonnie gave in terms of here are some events that she was interested in. If a student came to me and said the same thing, I would say that's great. I may forward one opportunity, but I wouldn't have the time to come up with an entire plan. And so I really appreciate it when interns are using the opportunity to manage their own career and manage their own interests.
That's great.
Thanks.
Moving to Darrell, what does Ed do to promote a high-quality internship experience? And in particular,
I remember when I was an intern, like there were no formalized activities. In fact, like I didn't even know that there were several dozens of other interns at Ed. So just over the course of like the last 5 years, the program has just improved tremendously. I think, and that's in part because of Secretary Duncan's leadership, and he's just someone who thinks that we really need to prepare all students to succeed in a competitive global economy, and through internships, that traditionally is one platform for that happening. So over the course of the last like 5 years, the program has changed, and we realize that while most of the department's intern experience will be working within their individual offices, we provide professional development opportunities, so interns have the chance to develop themselves professionally through a broad range of events that we host, including resume writing workshops, external events, and our education policy briefings, which are for department employees, but we extend them to interns to attend as well. We also have a brown bag lunch series, which is particularly popular among our interns, which allows them unique and targeted opportunities for professional development. So once a week, we bring members of the Ed team from senior leadership all the way up to Secretary Duncan to younger staff, all of the assistant secretaries to really meet with Ed interns once a week. And so I think this underscores the point that Bonnie made earlier. So if there are folks that you're interested in meeting at some point or another throughout the duration of your Ed internship experience, you'll have an opportunity to meet, an assistant secretary or a senior leader who's working on work that might be of interest to you. And those sessions are really, really informal. And we have assistant secretaries who tell students all the time, like, reach out to me. And for the most part, many of our senior leaders, have scheduled one-on-one meetings with, with interns. Secretary Duncan, every intern cohort meets with, at least 3 students. And it just, that's like a big, big deal because it's like really, really difficult to get on a secretary's schedule, but he really makes the time to meet with students. So those are 3 ways by which we offer professional development to students.
and I want to open this up to everyone, but what would you say students should look out for when selecting the internship in particular, and how might they gauge whether the internship is high quality for them?
This is Rachel. I'll start with that question, and feel free to add to my response. I think the number one thing is use your gut when you're interviewing for the position. If you feel like you're having a good rapport with the manager, I mean, interviews I know can be stressful and kind of scary experiences, but trust your instincts in terms of, do you think this could be an exciting opportunity? And a lot of times your gut will be right in terms of maybe your manager and find out, well, who am I going to be working with on a day-to-day, and try and ask lots of questions. These are opportunities for you to be interviewed, but typically in every interview, the person interviewing you will ask you if you have any questions. So they want to hear a couple questions. And so use this as a way to make an informed choice about whether or not this may be a good fit. And it's also really important to remember with internships, they're really an opportunity to explore what you like and what you don't like. And so you can use the interview almost as the same way to gauge what might be the best fit for you at that time in your life.
That's great. Darrell, Bonnie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, all of the points that Rachel made. I think, again, just from a personal standpoint, all of my internships were in the television field, and I thought that I was going to be a reporter. So because of my experience at the department, I was able to learn more about, the federal government. And, as a result, I now found that my passion is in education policy. And in fact, that's what I'm going to get my master's degree in. So it really informed me personally. So I just say, do your due diligence in terms of researching. Again, we found that even, before students intern at the department, they hear these, names. So we have offices such as the White House Initiatives on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, which is a very long and ambiguous name. And I think sometimes students don't necessarily know, what's associated with the work of them an email and, suggest that you have a conversation, tell them that you're interested in an internship. All of those things, I think, will help you before you make a decision to intern somewhere that might not necessarily be the best fit. So,
That's great. Well, I have one more question for all three of you before we jump into more questions and answers. What advice would you give to listeners today overall, or what is something you wish you knew when you were in their shoes? And let's keep it one very quick piece of information that you would like to know or would have liked to have known when you were in their shoes.
This is Bonnie. This is sort of a piggyback off of the previous question, and it would just be that it's not necessarily the content and the subject matter in which you're working that matters. It's the experience you're having. So applying to an internship that may not be specifically related to what you want to do it can be better if you're going to get a better experience. So if you're, for example, I'll make this quick. I had a friend who was working for a very famous congressperson, member of Congress, and theoretically, my friend's internship was much more prestigious than mine. I was working for a small agency in the Department of Labor that a lot of people haven't heard of. But my internship, because they gave me so much freedom and they put so much work into my professional development, was a much better experience and prepared me so much better for the future than his, where he was sitting at a desk answering a phone.
Yeah, that's great. Rachel, one bit of quick advice for people.
I would say be present and just be ready for every opportunity that comes available. A lot of times, just because you are physically in the office, you get opportunities to go to meetings and things. Always come professionally dressed as appropriate for that office environment. So in the office environment you're working in, it may not necessarily mean wearing a suit every day, but just come looking dressed somewhat professionally. A lot of times because I see someone, I'll think, oh, I should just bring them along with me. And so if I don't see you, sometimes I just won't think about it. And so there are often, I think, opportunities that come for people who are just kind of ready for that opportunity and available.
Great. And Darrell, one quick item from you about?
I'd say just apply. Including the departments are, extremely competitive. We receive upwards of 1,000 applications for about 125 to 150 positions, and so it's an extremely competitive program. And so, I just always say just have a plan B and C just in case an opportunity doesn't pan out. And then also, we host internships during the fall, spring, and during the summer. So hypothetically, if you weren't selected for the summer, you could try again in the fall. And just, lastly, one point that I didn't make earlier is that the department has 7 regional offices. And so if you're unable to intern in the department here in D.C., you can also intern in one of our regional offices, and we have them in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Kansas City, Denver, San Francisco, and Seattle. So those are also available to students. So just apply and just be persistent.
That's great. Thank you all three for that. Why don't we go to our questions, and we have a question from Rasan Nichols, who asks, what kind of skills and experiences will make college students stand out for internship applications? And I think this question is kind of reflecting the comments that several of you have made already about seeing a lot of applications that kind of look the same. There's nothing that differentiates them from the other one underneath it. So what kinds of things do you think will really make the application stand out? What kinds of examples have you seen?
This is Bonnie. I would say what makes it stand out is not listing that you have a skill, but listing how you've used that skill and what the impact was. So let's say that you are very great at managing other people. Instead of listing on your application, managed 5 volunteers at my student club, you would say, what impact did your good management skills have? And so change that to say, built a strong team, or improved communication between volunteers, or you could even be more specific and show what impact you had as opposed to just what that skill is.
Great. Darrell, Rachel?
Yeah, I'd say that we look for students with any given number of skill sets. To orient it, the skills vary depending upon the office, but ultimately we want students who are interested in the work of the department. And so again, there is no one particular type of student that we look for. As I mentioned earlier, you just have to be 16 years of age and enrolled in an institution. And so beyond those, we're just looking for someone who's really interested in coming to work, and who's just remotely interested in the work that we're doing. I'd say that that's the most important, and just understand it there is folks who review your application. So your resume and your cover letter, those are particularly important to folks at the department. So just taking time to really think about what you're writing and realize that someone's going to read it on the other end.
That's great, thank you. And I have one last question from Brittany O'Bay. How likely is it for an intern to be hired at the internship?
Hey, this is Rachel. I'll take this question first. I would say these positions are very competitive. That said, it doesn't mean that you can't have an opportunity with the Pathways programs or any of the other internship programs that are out there. For example, I do have some data on the Presidential Management Fellows program, so that's the third program I mentioned as part of the Pathways programs. It's for advanced degree candidates, and in that program, we are looking for the next leader. 600 slots. So you can get the sense of how competitive it is. So we didn't go from 12,000 to 600 with one cut. There were several rounds to narrow down the field, but it is a pretty competitive process overall in terms of how likely, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply and be considered for any position that interests you. I also it's really important to think about the quality that you're putting in each application. And I mentioned resumes earlier, and that is really important. It's also important to tailor your resume for each application. And that doesn't mean necessarily rewriting your resume, but actually looking at the announcement and what the job is asking for. And if there are words in the announcement that are the same or similar to the words that are in your resume, if they're similar but not the same, or if there's a skill or expertise that's maybe lower down in your resume, but it's a specific request in the job, put that on the top, because that's what that hiring manager is looking for. And so that's what we mean when we say tailoring your resume, not necessarily redoing it for each time, but actually putting that little bit of effort so that the hiring manager knows, okay, I really spent some thought when it comes to applying for this job. I think that really makes a difference in terms of whether or not your application is taken seriously.
And it does happen because we have one of our guests, Darrell, who actually did that and went from being an intern to actually having a position. Bonnie, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say it's a tough question to ask because I don't actually know the numbers of how many interns are converted into full-time jobs. Mm-hmm. I would say that the meaning of an internship has changed a lot over the years. I think as early as maybe 10 or 15 years ago, employers generally brought on interns few interns that I knew actually were hired by the places that worked for them. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do an internship because your internship will prepare you for work somewhere else. But I wouldn't necessarily assume that an agency is going to hire you. And I would really have an honest conversation with your supervisors, maybe midway through your internship, where you express your interest in continuing on and you ask them about what opportunities might be available. I think a lot of interns just wait to the very end of their internship and then say, okay, are you going to hire me now? And it's a conversation that your supervisors probably would have been interested in earlier in the game.
Great. Well, we're close to the end of our time. I'd like to basically let audience members know that you can find more information about federal internships, important skills for success, and more at engage.findyouthinfo.gov. We would love to hear from you. Also, please send your internship stories and experiences to ye4c@air.org or share them with us on our Facebook page at Youth Engaged for Change. For more information about the Pathways program, please refer to the information on the screen or email pathways@opm.gov. On behalf of the Interagency Working Group on Youth Programs, I would like to say a big thank you to our guest, Bonnie Pestridge, formerly an intern at the U.S. Department of Labor, Rachel Dorman with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, and Darrell Bonner with the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.